I stood frozen in the shadows of the hallway, holding my breath as the cold, hardwood floor chilled my bare feet. It was just past midnight in the sprawling Seattle suburban home I had paid for. From the kitchen, the clinking of expensive crystal echoed, followed by my son-in-law Derek, complaining in a hushed, irritated tone. He said I was a burden, a lingering ghost taking up too much space in their perfect lives. I waited for my daughter Rachel to defend me. Instead, her voice sliced through the dark, colder than ice. "You think I want him here, Derek? If he died, it would be the best 35th birthday gift I could ever ask for. All our problems would be solved." My blood ran completely cold. 40 years on construction sites had taught me to read people to spot a collapsing foundation before the building fell. In that single moment, the foundation of my entire family crumbled. I realized then that my daughter did not love me. She was just waiting for me to expire. I decided right there that tomorrow I would not yell. I would not confront them. I would simply freeze the house loan, drain every cent from our joint accounts, and vanish into thin air. If you have ever been betrayed by your own flesh and blood, let me know where you are listening from in the comments below. Hit the like button and subscribe if you believe in justice. Because what I left on her desk during her lavish birthday party did not just ruin her night, it completely shattered her reality. But to understand how a father could destroy his only daughter, you need to see the monster she had become. My name is Harrison Caldwell. I am 70 years old, a retired construction contractor. I spent 4 decades building homes for strangers, laying bricks and pouring concrete so my family would never know the sting of poverty. My wife Martha and I raised Rachel to have everything we never did. When Martha passed away 4 years ago from cancer, my world stopped spinning. The house we built felt too large, too quiet. So when Rachel and Derek came to me begging for help to buy their dream home in an upscale Seattle suburb, I gave them a down payment of $1.2 million. I thought I was buying family unity. I thought I was securing a warm place for my final years. I was actually buying my own golden cage. I retreated to my bedroom that night, my hands shaking violently. I sat on the edge of the mattress, staring at the walls I had paid for. The realization settled heavily in my chest. I had sacrificed my entire life, my savings, my sweat and tears, only to be reduced to an inconvenience. The next morning, the sun rose as if nothing had changed. I walked into the kitchen, my heart guarded behind a lifetime of discipline. Rachel was at the stove making breakfast, wearing a bright, loving smile. She poured my coffee exactly how I liked it and kissed my cheek. "Good morning, Dad," she said, her voice dripping with fake sweetness. "I hope you slept well." The contrast between her loving facade and the midnight venom I had heard hours earlier physically sickened me. She placed a plate in front of me, and right beside it, a thick stack of dense, legal-looking papers. "Derek is really stressed about his firm preparing for an initial public offering," she said softly. "His accountant just needs to merge the property maintenance costs to save you on property taxes, Dad. It is just routine paperwork. Just sign at the bottom. Sign at the..." Oh. I stared at the sleek silver pen she was holding out to me. The morning sun streamed through the expansive bay windows of the kitchen, casting a warm, golden glow across the imported granite countertops. Everything looked perfect. Everything looked exactly the way a wealthy, successful family's life should look. But as I looked at my daughter's bright, expectant smile, my mind was violently pulled back to the shadows of the hallway just a few hours before. I could still feel the cold hardwood seeping through my socks. I could still feel the exact moment my heart physically ached, a sharp, heavy tightening in my chest that had nothing to do with my age and everything to do with absolute betrayal. In that second, before reaching for the pen, the agonizing echo of the previous night replayed in my mind. I had been standing in the pitch-black corridor out of sight. From my hidden vantage point, I watched Derek, my polished son-in-law, pour himself a measure of expensive single malt scotch. The heavy crystal glasses clinked, a sound of celebration that felt entirely out of place. He loosened his silk tie, leaning back against the leather sofa, and complained about my presence. He called me a lingering burden. I waited in the dark, praying for Rachel to defend me. Instead, she leaned against the island, swirling her glass of wine, and delivered the fatal blow. She coldly calculated my life expectancy right there in the dim light. She mentioned my mild heart condition, as if she were reading a stock market projection, waiting for an underperforming asset to liquidate. When she said my death would be the best 35th birthday gift she could ever ask for, the air in my lungs simply vanished. When you spend 4 decades managing construction sites, you learn how to read structural integrity. You learn to spot the hairline fractures in a foundation long before the walls start coming down. Standing in that dark hallway, I realized the foundation of my family was completely rotten. I spent my life pouring concrete and breaking my back so my wife and daughter would never know the harsh sting of poverty. I sacrificed my own comfort to ensure they lived in absolute security. And yet there I was, reduced to a mere inconvenience. I remembered the day I wrote the check for this house. $1.2 million. After my beautiful Martha passed away 4 years ago, the silence in our old home became unbearable. When Rachel and Derek approached me with their plans for this upscale Seattle estate, they framed it as a sanctuary. They promised I would have my own suite, that I would never be alone in my final years. I thought I was buying family unity. I realized last night, with my hands shaking violently as I retreated to my lonely room, that I had actually bought my own golden cage. I financed the very walls that were now closing in on me. I did not sleep a single wink that night. I sat on the edge of my mattress, staring into the darkness, processing the sheer magnitude of her sociopathy. I did not yell. I did not storm into the living room and demand an explanation. A man who builds skyscrapers knows that you do not strike a load-bearing wall without a solid plan. You brace it, you calculate the angles, and then you bring it down safely. By the time the sun came up, I knew exactly what I had to do. Now, sitting at the breakfast table, the smell of fresh coffee and buttered toast felt like a mockery. Rachel nudged the thick stack of legal documents closer to me. "Come on, Dad," she coaxed, her voice a sickening melody of fake devotion. "Derek needs to leave for the office soon. It is just a simple tax consolidation form." I looked down at the dense text-heavy pages. My business instincts, honed over 40 years of signing contracts and reviewing blueprints, flared to life. You never sign anything blindly. Never. Especially not when the person handing you the pen wished for your death just hours ago. I needed an excuse to stop this, but I could not let them know I suspected anything. I had to play the part they had assigned me. I reached for the pen with my right hand, but as I did, I intentionally let my wrist tremble. I made a clumsy wide motion, sweeping my forearm directly into my full, steaming mug of black coffee. The dark liquid tipped over instantly, washing across the table in a rapid wave. It cascaded directly onto the thick stack of legal documents, soaking through the crisp white paper and blurring the black ink into a ruined, illegible mess. "Oh goodness," I gasped, putting on a flawless display of elderly panic. "I am so sorry, Rachel." My hand just gave out. "I am so clumsy lately. Let me get a towel." Derek leaped out of his chair as if the house were on fire. The polished, calm demeanor of a hedge fund vice president vanished in a split second. "What are you doing?" he shouted. His face flushing a deep, angry red. He lunged across the table, frantically trying to snatch the soaked papers away from the spreading puddle. "You ruined them. Do you have any idea how important these are? We needed these filed today." His reaction was entirely disproportionate for a simple tax document. It was the raw, unfiltered panic of a man whose lifeline had just been severed. The mask had slipped, revealing the desperate rat scrambling underneath. Rachel rushed over, shooting Derek a sharp warning glare to shut him up. She quickly grabbed a roll of paper towels and began dabbing at the mess, forcing her sweet facade back into place. "It is okay, Derek," she said through gritted teeth, her eyes flashing with hidden rage. "He did not mean to." "It is fine, Dad. Do not worry about it. He is just really stressed about his firm preparing for an initial public offering." We can print new ones later. I stood up slowly, apologizing profusely, playing the embarrassed father to perfection. I am so sorry, kids. Let me help you gather these up so we can throw the ruined ones away. I reached into the soggy pile of papers, pretending to help organize the mess. Amidst the chaos, Derek was distracted, angrily wiping down his expensive leather briefcase, and Rachel was scrubbing the granite counter. With quick, practiced precision, I slid one clean, unsoiled page from the very middle of the stack. I folded it instantly and slipped it into the deep pocket of my cardigan, completely unnoticed. I will just go wash up and get out of your way, I muttered, keeping my head bowed in mock shame. I am sorry again, Derek. He did not even look at me, just grunted in frustration as he threw the ruined stack into the trash can. I turned and walked slowly down the hallway, keeping my shoulders slumped until I was safely out of their sight. Once I stepped into my bedroom and locked the door behind me, my posture straightened. The trembling in my hands vanished. I reached into my pocket and pulled out the dry page I had salvaged. I walked over to my heavy oak desk, turned on the bright brass reading lamp, and pulled my magnifying glass from the top drawer. I smoothed the crumpled white paper out flat on the polished wooden surface. I leaned in, my heart pounding a steady, rhythmic beat of pure adrenaline. I slowly read the tiny fine print printed at the top. It had absolutely nothing to do with property taxes. It was not a maintenance agreement. It was a sweeping, legally binding power of attorney. The document was designed to grant Derek complete unrestricted control over my remaining assets, explicitly targeting the 65% equity I still held in this house. They were not trying to save me money on taxes. They were trying to steal my home right out from under my feet, legally stripping me of everything I owned before I was even in the ground. My daughter was not just ungrateful. She had become a monster. She was actively orchestrating a hostile takeover of my life. I would show her the true cost of betrayal. And I was about to teach her exactly what happens when you try to demolish a building that still has a foundation of solid steel. I stared at the thick stack of papers. The crisp white pages seemed innocent enough, neatly aligned and smelling faintly of fresh ink. But my instincts, sharpened by a lifetime of negotiating treacherous contracts, screamed at me to run. I reached for the sleek silver pen resting beside my plate, forcing my hand to tremble. I channeled every ounce of the shock and grief I had absorbed the night before into my right arm. With a clumsy, jerky motion, I knocked my wrist against the ceramic mug of steaming black coffee. The dark liquid surged over the rim, cascading directly onto the dense legal documents. It washed across the signature lines, soaking through the thick paper and turning the neat paragraphs into a blurred, illegible mess. I gasped, dropping the pen and grabbing a napkin, playing the role of the frail, embarrassed old man to absolute perfection. I am so sorry, Rachel, I stammered, my voice deliberately frail. My hand just gave out. I am so clumsy lately. Let me clean this up. Derek leaped from his chair as if the house were on fire. The polished, calm demeanor of a successful hedge fund. Vice President vanished in a fraction of a second. What are you doing? He shouted. His face flushing a deep mottled red. He lunged across the kitchen island, frantically trying to snatch the soaked papers away from the spreading dark puddle. You ruined them. Do you have any idea how important these are? We needed these filed by noon today. His reaction was entirely disproportionate for a simple tax consolidation form. It was the raw, unfiltered panic of a desperate man whose only lifeline had just been severed. The mask had completely slipped. Underneath the tailored suit and the expensive cologne was a terrified rat scrambling for survival. Rachel rushed over, shooting Derek a sharp warning glare that commanded him to shut his mouth immediately. She quickly grabbed a roll of paper towels and began dabbing at the mess, forcing her sweet, doting daughter facade back into place. It is okay, Derek, she said through gritted teeth, her eyes flashing with a hidden venomous rage that she tried to conceal behind a tight smile. He did not mean to. It is fine, Dad. Please do not worry about it. Derek is just really stressed about his firm preparing for an initial public offering. The pressure is getting to him. We can just print new copies later today. I stood up slowly, keeping my head bowed in mock shame, apologizing profusely over and over again. "I am so sorry, kids," I muttered carefully, reaching into the soggy pile. "Let me help you gather these up so we can throw the ruined ones away in the trash." Amidst the chaotic mess, Derek was distracted, angrily wiping down his expensive leather briefcase that had caught a few drops of coffee. Rachel was scrubbing the imported granite counter. Her back turned to me for just a brief second. With quick, practiced precision, I slid one clean, completely unsoiled page from the very middle of the thick stack. I folded it instantly and slipped it deep into the pocket of my wool cardigan, completely unnoticed by either of them. "I will just go wash up and get out of your way," I whispered, letting my shoulders slump heavily. "I am sorry again, Derek." He did not even look at me. He just grunted in profound frustration as he threw the ruined stack of papers into the trash can. I turned and walked slowly down the hallway, maintaining my slow, shuffling gait until I was safely out of their line of sight. Once I stepped into my bedroom and firmly locked the heavy wooden door behind me, my posture changed entirely. My back straightened. The manufactured trembling in my hands ceased immediately. I reached into my pocket and pulled out the dry page I had managed to salvage from the wreckage. I walked over to my solid oak desk, switched on the bright brass reading lamp, and pulled my magnifying glass from the top drawer. I smoothed the crumpled white paper out flat on the polished wooden surface, leaning in closely. My heart pounded a steady, rhythmic beat of pure adrenaline. I slowly read the tiny fine print near the top margin. It had absolutely nothing to do with property taxes. It was not a routine maintenance agreement. It was a sweeping, ironclad power of attorney document. The legal jargon was dense, but its purpose was unmistakably clear. The document was designed to grant Derek complete unrestricted control over my remaining assets. It specifically targeted the 65% equity I still held in this very house. They were not trying to save me money on taxes. They were trying to steal my home right out from under my feet, legally stripping me of everything I owned before I was even placed in the ground. My daughter was not just ungrateful. She had become a ruthless monster. She was actively orchestrating a hostile takeover of my life. I lowered the magnifying glass, feeling a cold, hard resolve settle over my soul. I would show her the true cost of her betrayal. I was about to teach her exactly what happens when you try to demolish a building that still has a foundation of solid steel. Driven by a sudden creeping paranoia, I opened my laptop. If they were bold enough to forge power of attorney documents, what else had they already touched? I logged into the joint medical emergency bank account I had set up for Rachel shortly after her mother died. I had funded it with $300,000 meant strictly for severe emergencies. The loading screen seemed to take an eternity. When the numbers finally appeared, all the air rushed out of my lungs. The balance was $4,200. My hands flew across the keyboard, pulling up the transaction history. I traced a long, systematic series of massive, unexplained wire transfers spanning the past 6 months. The money had been funneled out in large chunks, all directed to a mysterious limited liability company I had never heard of before. As I stared at the empty account, my phone buzzed on the desk. It was a text message from Rachel. "Are you feeling better, Dad? Do not worry about the coffee. I love you." She had added a red heart emoji at the end. The sheer sociopathy of her dual nature sickened me. She was sitting in the living room sending me affectionate messages while actively draining my life savings and plotting to steal my equity. The conflict within me dissolved completely. There was no more confusion, no more lingering parental hope that this was just a terrible misunderstanding. The anger that had been simmering since the previous night solidified into a cold, unbreakable weapon. I knew if I confronted them now, they would deny everything, hide the remaining assets, and probably accelerate their plans. I needed a strategy. I needed to become the architect of my own survival immediately. I closed my laptop slowly, letting the dark screen reflect my cold, determined eyes one final time. I stared at the thick stack of papers resting beside my plate of eggs and toast. The crisp white pages seemed innocent enough, neatly aligned and smelling faintly of fresh printer ink. But my instincts, sharpened by a lifetime of negotiating treacherous contracts and dealing with ruthless suppliers, screamed at me to run. I looked at Rachel. Her smile was flawless, painted on with the practiced ease of a woman who had spent her entire life getting exactly what she wanted. She held out a sleek silver pen, its metallic surface catching the morning light, filtering through the expensive bay windows. I had paid for those windows. I had paid for the granite countertops she leaned against. I had paid for the very floor beneath our feet. And now she wanted me to sign away my future with a casual stroke of a pen. 40 years in the construction business had taught me one absolute rule. You never sign anything blindly. You never put your name on a dotted line when you are rushed, and you especially never sign when the person handing you the pen wished for your death just a few hours prior. The weight of the silver pen felt like a loaded weapon in my hand. I needed an excuse to stop this immediately, but I could not let them know I suspected anything. I knew I had to maintain my composure completely. One wrong look could give everything away forever. I could feel my heartbeat drumming loudly in my ears, urging me to act quickly and decisively. If I refused outright, they would know I was onto them. I had to play the part they had assigned me. I had to be the frail, trusting, clueless old man they thought I was. I reached for the pen with my right hand, making sure my fingers trembled just slightly. It was a subtle movement, the kind of mild tremor that comes with advanced age and exhaustion. I shifted my weight in the heavy wooden dining chair, letting out a soft, strained breath to sell the performance. Beside the legal documents sat my large ceramic mug filled to the brim with steaming black coffee. It was the perfect hazard. I moved my arm in a clumsy wide arc, pretending to reach for the sugar bowl. I channeled every ounce of the shock and grief I had absorbed the night before into that single deliberate motion. My wrist collided hard with the side of the heavy ceramic mug. The impact was solid. The dark, scalding liquid surged over the rim in a rapid, forceful wave. It cascaded directly onto the dense stack of legal documents. I watched the coffee wash across the signature lines, soaking rapidly through the thick layers of paper. The neat, official paragraphs blurred instantly as the black ink bled into an illegible, ruined mess. I let out a loud gasp, dropping the silver pen onto the floor. I grabbed a cloth napkin and began dabbing uselessly at the spreading puddle, playing the role of the embarrassed, incompetent father to absolute perfection. "Oh, goodness," I stammered, making sure my voice sounded suitably frail and panicked. "I am so sorry, Rachel. My hand just gave out on me. I have been so clumsy lately. Let me clean this up right now." Derek leaped from his leather dining chair as if the entire house had suddenly caught fire. The polished, calm demeanor of a successful hedge fund vice president vanished in a fraction of a second. "What are you doing?" he shouted, his voice cracking with an intensity that echoed off the high ceilings. His face flushed a deep, mottled red, the veins in his neck bulging against his crisp white collar. He lunged across the wide kitchen island, his hands grasping frantically at the soaked papers. He tried to snatch them away from the spreading dark puddle, but the wet pages tore easily in his desperate grip. "You completely ruined them," he roared, glaring down at me with unmasked hatred. "Do you have any idea how important these documents are? We needed these finalized and filed by noon today." His reaction was entirely disproportionate for a simple tax consolidation form. A normal person would simply print a new copy and shrug off an accidental spill. But Derek was not acting like a normal person. It was the raw, unfiltered panic of a desperate man whose only lifeline had just been unexpectedly severed. The professional mask had completely slipped. Underneath the tailored designer suit and the expensive cologne was a terrified rat scrambling for survival. He stared at the dripping pages in his hands as if he were holding his own death warrant. His chest heaved with heavy, ragged breaths. Rachel rushed over immediately, shooting Derek a sharp warning glare that commanded him to shut his mouth and regain his composure. She stepped between us, acting as a human shield to cover his bizarre outburst. She quickly grabbed a heavy roll of paper towels and began aggressively scrubbing the granite counter, forcing her sweet, doting daughter facade back into place. "It is perfectly fine, Derek," she said through gritted teeth. Her eyes flashed with a hidden venomous rage that she tried desperately to conceal behind a tight, artificial smile. He did not mean to spill his drink. "It is an accident. Dad, please do not worry about it. Derek is just really stressed about his firm preparing for a major initial public offering this month. The financial pressure at the office is really getting to him. We can just print new copies later this afternoon." I stood up slowly from the table, keeping my head bowed in mock shame. I apologized profusely, repeating how terrible I felt for causing such an inconvenience. "I am so incredibly sorry, kids," I muttered carefully, reaching my hands into the soggy pile of ruined paperwork. "Let me help you gather these wet pages up so we can throw them away in the trash." Amidst the chaotic mess on the kitchen island, Derek was entirely distracted. He was angrily wiping down his expensive leather briefcase that had caught a few stray drops of the spilled coffee. Rachel was focused on scrubbing the sticky residue off the stone countertop, her back turned to me for just a brief, vital second. This was my only window of opportunity. With quick, practiced precision, I slid one clean, completely unsoiled page from the very middle of the thick stack. I folded the dry paper instantly and slipped it deep into the pocket of my thick wool cardigan. The movement was completely unnoticed by either of them. "I will just go wash my hands and get out of your way," I whispered, letting my shoulders slump heavily to complete the illusion of a defeated old man. "I am so sorry again, Derek." He did not even look at me. He just let out a long grunt of profound frustration as he threw the ruined stack of documents into the tall trash can. I turned around and walked very slowly down the long hallway, maintaining my slow, shuffling gait until I was safely out of their line of sight. Once I stepped over the threshold of my bedroom, I pushed the heavy oak door shut and turned the brass lock with a satisfying, metallic click. The click felt like the ceiling of a vault, a definitive barrier between the theater of lies out in the kitchen and the harsh, unfiltered truth I was about to confront in private. My posture, which I had carefully stooped and hunched to play the part of a defeated, clumsy old man, instantly straightened. The manufactured trembling in my hands vanished, replaced by a cold, steady stillness. I reached deep into the pocket of my thick wool cardigan and pulled out the single sheet of crisp white paper I had managed to salvage from the coffee-soaked wreckage. It was completely dry, perfectly preserved, a solitary piece of evidence snatched from the jaws of their deceit. I walked slowly across the plush carpet toward the solid oak desk sitting in the corner of the room. This desk was a relic from my active working days, a massive, sturdy piece of furniture where I had spent decades reviewing architectural blueprints, signing construction contracts, and calculating material costs to ensure my family never had to worry about their future. I reached out and switched on the brass reading lamp. The warm, focused pool of light illuminated the polished wood grain and the folded paper in my hand. I sat down heavily in the leather chair, feeling the familiar creak of the springs beneath me. With meticulous care, I unfolded the paper and smoothed it out flat against the surface of the desk, running my calloused palms over the slight creases. My eyesight was not what it used to be. The years of staring at fine print under glaring sight lights and squinting through thick drywall dust had taken their toll on my vision. I pulled open the top right drawer of the desk and took out my old heavy brass magnifying glass. It was a gift Martha had given me on our 30th wedding anniversary, back when life was simple and love was an absolute certainty. I held the cold metal handle tightly, bringing the thick glass lens down over the paper. The tiny, densely packed black letters suddenly jumped into sharp focus. I took a deep, bracing breath and began to read the document line by line, my mind shifting seamlessly back into the analytical gear I had relied on for 40 years in the cutthroat construction business. It took less than 30 seconds for the complete and utter reality of their lie to materialize before my eyes. There was absolutely no mention of property taxes anywhere on the page. There was no language regarding routine maintenance consolidation, no clauses about fiscal year filings, and no reference to his supposed upcoming initial public offering. Rachel had looked me dead in the eyes, smiled the sweet smile of a loving daughter, and lied to my face without a single hesitation. The document was a sweeping, ironclad, durable power of attorney. I moved the magnifying glass slowly across the dense paragraphs, my blood running colder with every single word. The legal jargon was complex, designed specifically to overwhelm and confuse a layman, but I was not a layman. I had spent half my life arguing with corporate lawyers and untangling liability clauses. I knew exactly what I was looking at. This specific page outlined the transfer of complete unrestricted fiduciary control over my remaining assets. It explicitly named Derek Foster as my sole legal representative, granting him the absolute authority to buy, sell, encumber, or liquidate real estate property held in my name without requiring my presence, my signature, or my consent. My eyes locked onto one specific terrifying clause buried deep within the text. It specifically targeted the 65% equity I still firmly held in this very house. When I had given them the $1.2 million down payment 4 years ago, I had insisted on maintaining that equity stake to protect my investment. I thought I was being a responsible father, ensuring that the wealth I had built alongside Martha would remain secure for the entire family. Now I saw their true countermove. They were not just trying to take control of my finances. They were trying to steal my home right out from under my feet, legally stripping me of everything I owned before I was even placed in the cold ground. The sheer magnitude of the betrayal hit me like a physical blow to the chest. I lowered the magnifying glass, letting it rest on the desk with a soft thud. I leaned back in my leather chair and stared blankly at the wall, struggling to reconcile the horrible reality of the document with the image of the daughter I had raised. This was the same girl I had carried on my shoulders through crowded amusement parks. This was the young woman whose college tuition I had worked double shifts to pay in full so she would graduate without a single cent of debt. I had bought her first car, wiped away her tears after her first heartbreak, and walked her down the aisle to marry the very man who was now attempting to legally erase me from existence. She was not just ungrateful. She had become a ruthless, calculating monster. She was actively orchestrating a hostile, predatory takeover of my entire life. I thought about the conversation I had overheard in the darkness of the hallway just a few hours prior. Rachel had said my death would be the best 35th birthday gift she could ever ask for. I had assumed it was a moment of sheer frustration, a terrible, callous exaggeration born of annoyance. But sitting here looking at the undeniable legal proof of their plot, I realized it was not an emotional outburst at all. It was a cold, premeditated financial strategy. They needed my equity. They needed my assets. And I was simply a stubborn obstacle standing between them and my life savings. They were tired of waiting for nature to take its course, so they had manufactured a legal shortcut to speed up the process. A profound, suffocating grief washed over me as I thought of Martha. My beautiful, kind-hearted wife had spent her final days worrying about Rachel, making me promise to always look after our little girl. I kept that promise, Martha, I whispered to the empty room, my voice cracking under the weight of a sorrow so deep it threatened to consume me entirely. I kept my promise, but our little girl is gone. Whatever is living out there in that kitchen, whatever is wearing her face and smiling that empty smile, it is not the child we loved. If Martha could see what Rachel had become, it would have broken her gentle heart into a million pieces. But Martha was gone, and I was the only one left to face the monster we had unknowingly created. I stared at the paper, knowing that my next move would be completely devastating. My mind was made up right then, and I began to formulate a plan to survive this nightmare. I sat in the heavy silence of my locked bedroom, my hands resting heavily on the surface of my desk. The laptop screen had gone black, but the horrifying number was permanently burned into my retinas. $4,212. That was absolutely all that remained of a $300,000 safety net. I had closed the computer in a moment of rage, needing a physical barrier between myself and the proof of my daughter's treachery. But a retired contractor knows that looking away from a structural failure does not fix the foundation. It only guarantees that the building will eventually collapse on top of you. I slowly took a deep, shuddering breath, forcing the raw grief into the pit of my stomach. I could not afford the luxury of sorrow right now. I needed absolute, undeniable facts. I opened the laptop again. The screen flickered back to life, casting a glow across my weathered hands. I logged back into the secure banking portal, navigating past the initial dashboard to access the detailed transaction history. This was not just any standard savings account. This was the sacred emergency fund I had established the week after my Martha passed away. It was funded directly by her life insurance payout. I had explicitly told Rachel that this money was to be left untouched unless there was a medical emergency or a critical need for her future children. It was meant to be a protective shield, a financial embrace from her late mother to ensure she would never face a crisis alone. To see it completely drained was not just theft. It was a desecration of Martha's final legacy. I clicked the button to generate the statements for the past 6 months. The digital documents generated, instantly filling the screen with rows of withdrawals. My eyes scanned the lines of data tracking the hemorrhage of my life savings. It had absolutely not happened all at once today. It was a slow, continuous bleeding. In October, I saw a wire transfer for $45,000. In November, 2 separate transfers totaling $80,000. December showed another massive withdrawal of $65,000. Each outgoing transaction was clinically labeled with the same ambiguous, soulless destination. Apex Horizon Holdings Limited Liability Company. It was a phantom entity, a faceless corporate shell designed specifically to swallow my money without leaving a clear trail. They had not spent this on luxury vacations or designer handbags. You do not wire hundreds of thousands of dollars to an anonymous holding company to buy shoes. This was something vastly more sinister and infinitely more desperate. I grabbed a yellow legal pad and a pen from my desk drawer, reverting to the meticulous project manager I had been for 4 decades. I began writing down the exact dates and amounts of every single wire transfer, tallying the devastating sum. Derek was currently a vice president at a prominent downtown hedge fund. He managed millions for wealthy clients. He knew exactly how to move money through untraceable channels, how to obscure the destination of stolen funds behind layers of corporate bureaucracy. Rachel had clearly handed him the account and routing numbers, willingly handing over her mother's sacred legacy to fund whatever dark pit Derek had dug for himself. The remaining $4,212 was likely left there as a prop, a token balance designed to keep the account open and avoid triggering alerts from the bank. It was truly a masterclass in financial deception. As my pen scratched furiously across the yellow legal pad, my burner phone vibrated violently against the wood. I had intentionally left my primary smartphone in the living room specifically to avoid suspicion, but Rachel was nothing if not persistent. I quietly watched the screen of the secondary device light up with a forwarded notification. It was another text message from my daughter following up on the sickeningly sweet note she had sent just minutes prior. Dad, Derek feels absolutely terrible about yelling over the spilled coffee, the message read. He is just under an unbelievable amount of daily pressure to provide the perfect life for us. Please do not be angry with him. We love you so much, and we are so incredibly blessed to have you living here with us. I sat and stared at the glowing text, feeling a wave of absolute nausea wash over my entire body. The sheer terrifying sociopathy required to send those words was incomprehensible to me. She was sitting comfortably in the lavish living room I had purchased, typing out messages overflowing with fake devotion, while simultaneously participating in the systematic theft of my life savings and plotting to legally seize the very roof over my head. The absolute duality of her daily existence was terrifying. The woman sending those heart emojis was the exact same woman I had overheard in the dead of night, coldly wishing for my sudden death as her ultimate birthday present. How long had she been wearing this mask? How many of her loving smiles over the past 4 years had been genuine? And how many had been calculated performances designed solely to extract more wealth from a grieving, lonely widow? The realization that my only child viewed me merely as an expiring ATM was a uniquely agonizing form of torture. I did not shed a single tear today. The deep, agonizing sorrow that had threatened to crush my chest only moments ago suddenly evaporated, replaced entirely by a freezing, hyper-focused clarity. I was no longer a heartbroken father hoping for a misunderstanding. I was a man trapped behind enemy lines dealing with a highly coordinated hostile force. Every single text message she sent, every warm smile she offered, was a tactical maneuver designed to keep me docile and oblivious while they drained my veins dry. I slowly typed out a response on my linked account, ensuring my tone matched her manufactured sweetness perfectly. "It is completely fine, sweetheart," I wrote back. "I know how stressful corporate finance can be. Tell Derek I am not upset at all. I am just going to rest in my room for a while. Love you too." I hit send without hesitation. I watched the tiny delivery receipt appear on the screen, knowing that my message would successfully pacify them for the rest of the afternoon. They firmly believed their secret was safe, perfectly confident that the clueless old man was securely tucked away in his bedroom, oblivious to the fact that his life was being stolen, piece by piece. But they had made a fatal miscalculation. They had forgotten that before I was a tired old man, I was a master builder. I knew exactly how to dismantle a rotten foundation. I would not let them take another dime. I carefully printed out every single bank statement, feeling the heat of the paper. I slipped the warm, freshly printed pages into a secure manila folder alongside the forged power of attorney document. The safety net Martha and I had woven with decades of love and labor was entirely empty. Now it was time to build a trap. I knew perfectly well that if I marched downstairs and confronted them with the printed bank statements right now, they would immediately pivot to a fierce defense. They would lie, they would cry, and they would hide whatever remaining assets they had not already siphoned away. I needed a few days to fully align my legal defenses before I dropped the heavy hammer. To buy that precious time, I decided to weaponize their own toxic arrogance. They already viewed me as a fragile, expiring asset, standing in the way of their ultimate payday. I simply needed to convince them my mind was deteriorating just as rapidly as they secretly hoped. I began my performance the next morning. I walked into the massive kitchen wearing a completely mismatched pair of socks and an unevenly buttoned sweater. I stood by the coffee maker, staring at the buttons, as if trying to decipher an alien language. When Derek finally walked in, fully dressed for work, I turned to him with a pleasantly vacant smile. "Good morning, David," I said, my voice trembling with manufactured fragility. "Are you heading to college today?" Derek stopped dead, his coffee cup freezing halfway to his mouth. He exchanged a wide-eyed glance with Rachel, who had just stepped in. "It is Derek, Dad," she corrected me gently, though I heard the panic in her tone. "He is going to his firm, not college." I blinked, massaging my temples, letting profound confusion wash over my features. "Oh, of course," I mumbled, shuffling slowly. "I am sorry my mind is in a fog today." "What day is it again?" Rachel rushed to my side, gripping my elbow entirely too tight to be affectionate. "It is Thursday, Dad," she said, her voice dripping with patronizing sweetness. "Let us get you back to your room. You need to rest." As she guided me down the hallway, I caught a glimpse of Derek. The initial shock on his face had completely melted away into profound, unadulterated relief. A slow, triumphant smirk crept across his face. He actually believed his problem was solving itself. He believed my cognitive decline was accelerating, paving a smooth, frictionless path for their legal takeover. Over the next 48 hours, I leaned heavily into the senile routine. I purposefully misplaced my wallet in the refrigerator. I left the television blaring at maximum volume, while pretending to nap in the leather recliner. I repeatedly asked Rachel the same questions about her mother, acting as though Martha were simply out at the grocery store instead of having passed away 4 years ago. Every single fabricated symptom was a masterclass in deception, and the results were immediate and incredibly revealing. Because they firmly believed I was losing my grip on reality, they completely lowered their guard. They stopped seeing me as a threat. In their arrogant minds, I was no longer a sharp, retired construction manager. I was just a ghost wandering the halls, deaf and blind to the world around me. This false sense of security led them to make a massive, fatal mistake. They stopped whispering. The sprawling, open-concept layout of the house meant that sound carried easily from the modern kitchen into the adjacent formal living room. I spent my afternoons sitting in a high-backed armchair, a thick hardcover novel resting on my lap, pretending to be fast asleep. My eyes were closed, my breathing was deep and rhythmic, but my ears were wide open, capturing every single word they carelessly threw into the open air. It was late Friday afternoon when the true depth of their desperation finally revealed itself. I was holding my position in the armchair, the afternoon sun warming my face when I heard the heavy front door slam shut. Derek marched into the kitchen, his heavy leather dress shoes thudding aggressively against the hardwood floor. He slammed his briefcase onto the granite counter with a violent crash. "We have a massive problem," he hissed, his voice trembling with a frantic, unhinged energy. "The lenders are not backing off, Rachel. They are demanding the next installment by the end of the month. I told them the LLC structure needed more time to process the incoming equity, but they do not care. They want their money right now." I heard the sharp clanking of a glass bottle. Rachel was pouring him a drink. "You need to calm down, Derek," she commanded, her tone cold and authoritative. "Panic is not going to help us right now. Did you check the balance on the medical emergency account? We drained the last of the $300,000 yesterday." "It is completely gone," he snapped back. "It went straight into Apex Horizon just like you asked, but it is not enough to cover the margin calls. If my partners find out about the unauthorized leveraging, I am finished. I am looking at a minimum of 10 years in federal prison, Rachel. We need his signature on that final power of attorney document today. I do not care how confused he is acting. Just guide his hand and make him sign the damn paper." I kept my eyes firmly shut, my chest rising and falling in a steady, measured rhythm even as my blood boiled hot in my veins. The pieces of the puzzle were rapidly clicking together, forming a horrifying picture of utter financial ruin. Derek was not just a greedy hedge fund manager. He was drowning in massive illicit debt. He had heavily leveraged his own firm, made catastrophic bets, and was now scrambling to cover his tracks before the federal authorities caught wind of his embezzlement. The $300,000 they had stolen from Martha's safety net was merely a drop in the bucket. They needed the house. They needed my entire equity to save Derek from a lengthy prison sentence. "We cannot force him to sign it while he is in this state," Rachel argued. "If he signs it with a shaky hand or writes the wrong date, the notary might flag it as coercion. We have to wait until he has a lucid morning. We will tell him it is a medical proxy form. He trusts me. He will sign it if I tell him it is for his health care. We just need to keep him isolated. Do not ruin this by pushing too hard, Derek. We are literally inches away from the finish line." The sheer, calculated malice in her voice was truly breathtaking to witness firsthand. She was speaking about my life, my freedom, and my assets, as if I were a mere piece of livestock, being methodically prepared for slaughter. She was perfectly willing to hand over her father's entire estate to cover her husband's violent criminal debts, all while effortlessly playing the concerned daughter. Their conversation eventually faded away as Derek poured himself another drink and stormed off to his home office. I remained completely motionless in the armchair, ensuring the house was entirely silent before I finally opened my eyes. My feigned decline had handed me the exact audio clues I needed to proceed. I slowly stood up, absolutely ready to fight them here and now. I waited until the house was entirely silent before I pushed myself out of the armchair. The adrenaline coursing through my veins masked the physical discomfort of faking sleep. I needed to move without raising a single red flag. I shuffled into the kitchen, intentionally knocking a wooden spoon off the counter to announce my presence. Rachel appeared from the hallway a moment later, her eyes darting to my face to gauge my mental state. I gave her a blank, slightly bewildered smile, patting my pockets with a slow, exaggerated helplessness. "I am just going to take a small walk down to the corner pharmacy," I said, making my voice sound thin and reedy. "I think I am out of my joint supplements, and the fresh air might clear this terrible fog in my head." She looked at me with a mixture of pity and barely concealed impatience. "Do you want Derek to drive you?" she asked, clearly unwilling to sacrifice her own afternoon. I waved my hand dismissively, ensuring my tremor was visible. No, it is just a few blocks. I need to stretch my legs." She nodded, turning her attention back to her curated life. "Just be back before dark, Dad," she called out casually. I stepped out the front door, feeling the crisp Seattle air hit my lungs. I kept my gait slow and hesitant while I was still within view of the heavy front windows, leaning slightly as if my hip were bothering me. But the moment I turned the corner and the manicured hedges shielded me from the house, my stride lengthened. The shuffling old man evaporated, replaced by the sharp, calculating contractor who had spent decades managing millions of dollars. I walked with absolute, uncompromising purpose. The local pharmacy was a quiet, unassuming place about 4 blocks away, tucked into a small suburban strip mall. I walked through the automatic sliding doors, bypassing the pharmacy counter completely, and headed straight for the electronics aisle in the back corner. I scanned the rows of prepaid cell phones, grabbing the simplest, most untraceable model they had on the shelf, along with a prepaid minutes card. I carried the items to the front register, pulling 2 crisp $50 bills from my money clip. The cashier barely looked up as he scanned the items and handed me my change. I thanked him politely and walked out, leaving no digital footprint, no credit card trail, and absolutely no way for Derek to monitor my communications. I walked to a small public park a few blocks away from the pharmacy. The late afternoon sun filtered through the tall pine trees, casting long shadows across the empty wooden benches. I sat down on a cold iron seat and tore open the plastic packaging. My hands moved quickly and efficiently, inserting the battery and activating the prepaid service. Within 3 minutes, I had a fully functional, secure lifeline. I took a deep breath, mentally organizing the precise directives I needed to deliver. I dialed a number I had committed to memory over 15 years ago. It was the direct, unlisted cell phone number of Victor Bradley. Victor was my longtime corporate attorney, a ruthless, brilliant legal mind who had helped me navigate the treacherous waters of commercial real estate and corporate litigation. He was a wartime consigliere, a man who viewed the legal system as a chessboard and played exclusively to win. The phone rang exactly twice before the line clicked open. Bradley, his deep voice, answered instantly. "Victor, it is." "Harrison Caldwell," I replied, keeping my tone perfectly level. There was a brief, surprised pause on the other end of the line. "Harrison," Victor said, the professional chill warming slightly into genuine recognition. "It has been a long time, my friend. I thought you had fully retired to enjoy the quiet life in the suburbs. What can I do for you? I am calling you from an unregistered prepaid phone, Victor," I said, cutting straight to the chase. "I need you to listen very carefully, and I need you to assume that all my personal communications and regular bank accounts are currently compromised." The warmth in Victor's voice vanished instantly, replaced by the sharp analytical edge I was paying him for. "Go ahead, Harrison," he said, his tone dead serious. "Tell me exactly what we are dealing with today." I laid out the entire situation with cold, clinical precision. I told him about the forged power of attorney document I had salvaged from the coffee spill. I detailed the systematic draining of the $300,000 medical emergency account. I gave him the specific name of the anonymous limited liability company that had swallowed my savings, Apex Horizon Holdings. Finally, I relayed the conversation I had overheard regarding Derek's desperate margin calls, his unauthorized leveraging at the hedge fund, and their imminent plan to trick me into signing away my 65% equity in the house under the guise of a medical proxy. I need you to initiate a total scorched earth forensic investigation into Apex Horizon Holdings. Immediately, I instructed, my voice hard as stone. I need to know exactly who registered it, where the money went, and what illicit debts Derek Foster is attempting to conceal. Furthermore, I need you to draft the strongest legal injunctions possible to freeze the deed to my house. I want an impenetrable legal lock placed on that property by Monday morning. If they try to file that forged power of attorney, I want it blocked and reported as fraudulent instantly. Victor was silent for a long moment. Harrison, he finally said, his voice heavy with caution. I can do exactly what you are asking. I can deploy a team of forensic accountants to tear Derek's financial life apart, and I can lock down that house deed so tightly he will not be able to borrow a single dime against it. But I need you to understand the absolute gravity of what you are instructing me to do right now. The moment I file these injunctions and flag that power of attorney, the veil of secrecy is permanently destroyed. Pulling this pin is going to initiate a catastrophic legal bloodbath. Your daughter and your son-in-law will be backed into a corner, facing potential federal fraud charges and total financial ruin. They will fight back with everything they have, and it will be incredibly public and profoundly painful for your family. Are you absolutely certain you are prepared to cross this specific line today? I listened to his warning, letting the severe reality of those spoken words settle over me. I thought about the staggering deceit required to systematically rob a grieving father, while smiling kindly in his face every morning. There was no trace of lingering familial loyalty left inside my shattered heart, only an uncompromising demand for absolute justice. I am absolutely certain, Victor. I answered firmly, my voice unwavering. Prepare the necessary paperwork immediately and initiate the investigation. You have my absolute green light. Go ahead and start the fire. I stepped quietly out the back door, my hands trembling, not from age but from absolute rage. The burner phone I had discreetly acquired rested securely in the deep pocket of my wool cardigan. The afternoon air had grown noticeably sharper, biting at my exposed neck, but I did not feel the cold. I felt only a burning, singular focus. Victor Bradley had given me the confirmation I needed to escalate my counteroffensive. Now I needed the absolute, undeniable proof of Derek Foster's financial crimes, the kind of hard evidence that could not be argued away in a courtroom. Victor had been characteristically efficient. Before we disconnected our brief call, he had given me an address and a time, instructing me to meet a man who specialized in unearthing buried financial secrets. I took a highly convoluted route, weaving through the quiet suburban streets. I walked until I reached the edge of our neighborhood and crossed into the commercial district. I caught a local bus heading away from the city center, riding it for nearly 40 minutes, until the manicured lawns were replaced by the gritty industrial sprawl of the outer limits. The location Victor had chosen was a weathered, neon-lit diner situated next to a sprawling truck stop. It was precisely the kind of place where a retired construction manager from the upscale suburbs would never be seen. The parking lot was packed with heavy rigs. I pushed through the glass doors and was immediately hit by a wall of sound and the thick aroma of fried grease and stale coffee. The diner was chaotic, filled with weary travelers, loud families, and truckers taking rest breaks. Clattering silverware, overlapping conversations, and the constant hiss of the grill created a perfect, impenetrable blanket of white noise. No one was looking at me. I was just another anonymous old man blending into the faded vinyl booths. I scanned the room and spotted him sitting alone in a corner booth facing the door, exactly as Victor had described. Leo Barnes did not look like a high-powered forensic financial investigator. He looked like a tired high school history teacher. He wore a rumpled corduroy jacket over a plain gray sweater, and his thinning brown hair was pushed back carelessly. But as I slid into the cracked vinyl booth across from him, I noticed his eyes. They were sharp, analytical, and completely devoid of warmth. They were the eyes of a predator who hunted through ledgers and balance sheets instead of the wilderness. He did not offer a handshake or a polite greeting. He simply took a slow sip from a chipped porcelain mug and set it down on the scratched Formica table. "Victor tells me you have a rat in your foundation," Leo said, his voice barely rising above the ambient clatter of the diner. "A rat who thinks he is smarter than the house he is chewing through." "I appreciate Victor's colorful metaphors," I replied, keeping my voice equally low and steady. "But I am not here to discuss pest control. I am here to hire a ghost to follow a trail of stolen money that is meant to vanish into thin air." I reached inside my coat and pulled out the plain manila envelope I had prepared. I slid it across the sticky table. Leo placed his hand flat over it, sliding it smoothly into his worn leather briefcase without breaking eye contact. "Inside that envelope, you will find the routing numbers for a joint medical emergency account that was originally funded with $300,000. I explained, leaning forward slightly. "Over the past 6 months, it has been systematically drained down to a pitiful $4,000. The outgoing wire transfers were all directed to an anonymous corporate entity called Apex Horizon Holdings. I need to know exactly who registered that limited liability company, who controls the underlying bank accounts, and where every single cent of my money has been diverted." Leo nodded slowly, his expression unchanging. "Tracing domestic shells is straightforward work. Hedge fund managers love to use Wyoming or Delaware registries to mask their footprints, but money always leaves a trail if you know which stones to overturn." "What else are we looking for?" I took a deep breath, recalling the panicked conversation I had overheard between Rachel and Derek just hours prior. "Derek Foster is a vice president at a prominent downtown financial firm," I continued. "He has been claiming his firm is preparing for an initial public offering this month, but that is a complete lie. He is drowning in unauthorized leverage and facing catastrophic margin calls. He is stealing my money to patch his sinking ship." "I need you to dig into his firm," I said, my voice hardening. "I need to know the exact extent of his unauthorized trading. I want to know who is demanding payment and how much he has illegally leveraged. I need a comprehensive map of his financial ruin. If he is embezzling client funds to save his own skin, I want the absolute proof in my hands. I want his professional life laid bare." Leo finally showed a faint glimmer of interest, a slight upward curve at the corner of his mouth. "Unraveling a rogue hedge fund manager is a beautiful kind of chaos. When these guys panic, they get sloppy. They start moving money too fast, bypassing compliance protocols and leaving digital fingerprints all over the servers. If he is stealing from a medical emergency fund to cover margin calls, he is bleeding out. It will not take me long to find the severed artery." "How long is—" "Not long," I asked, needing a definitive timeline. "The clock is ticking against me. They are actively trying to coerce me into signing a forged power of attorney to steal the equity in my home. They are growing impatient, and I cannot maintain my cover as a senile old man indefinitely. I need this weapon loaded and ready to fire as quickly as humanly possible." Leo pulled a small battered notebook from his pocket and jotted down a single line. "Today is Friday," he said, his tone shifting into absolute professionalism. "Forensic tracing across multiple institutional firewalls requires a specific touch, but desperation makes my job significantly easier. Give me exactly 72 hours. I will have the complete unmasking of Apex Horizon Holdings, a detailed ledger of Derek Foster's margin debt, and the definitive proof of his embezzlement. I will deliver the entire package to you by Monday evening." "Monday evening," I repeated, feeling a dark, profound sense of poetic justice settle over me. Monday was Rachel's 35th birthday. It was the exact day she had jokingly told Derek that my sudden death would be the greatest gift she could ever receive. She was planning a massive, lavish dinner party at my house, paid for, with my money, to celebrate her milestone surrounded by her shallow, oblivious friends. It would be the absolute perfect stage. "Monday is acceptable," I told Leo, rising slowly from the booth. "I have a very important celebration to attend that night, and I want to bring the perfect surprise gift." I left the noise of the diner behind the cold air bracing against my skin as I made my way back to the sprawling suburban house that had become my gilded prison. By the time I stepped through the heavy mahogany front door, the entire atmosphere of the house had shifted into a state of frantic high-voltage energy. It was Saturday morning, and Rachel was in the absolute throes of aggressive preparation for her 35th birthday bash scheduled for Monday evening. The expansive, formal living room and the pristine marble kitchen had been completely taken over by a small army of event planners, florists, and decorators. Rachel was barking orders at a young woman carrying a clipboard pointing sharply at the positioning of massive floral arrangements and the draping of imported silk over the dining chairs. She had invited exactly 100 high society guests, a carefully curated list of wealthy socialites, corporate executives, and hedge fund partners who could bolster Derek's failing professional image. This was not a celebration of life. It was a cold, calculated, lavish exhibition of fake wealth perfectly designed to completely mask the desperate, drowning reality of their terrible financial situation. I maintained my slow, shuffling gait as I navigated through the chaos, keeping my shoulders slumped and my eyes fixed on the floor. I played the part of the bewildered old man, perfectly gently sidestepping a towering display of white orchids. Rachel spotted me and immediately altered her entire demeanor. The harsh, demanding tone she had used with the decorators vanished instantly, replaced by the soft, overly affectionate voice she reserved strictly for her clueless father. She glided across the room, wrapping her arms around my neck in a tight, perfumed embrace. "Good morning, Dad," she chimed, her smile bright and perfectly practiced. "I hope all this noise is not disturbing your rest." I smiled back, letting my hands tremble slightly as I patted her arm. "It is quite a production, sweetheart," I mumbled, forcing a tone of mild confusion. She sighed dramatically, letting her shoulders drop to project an image of sudden, overwhelming stress. "It is, and it is causing me a tiny bit of a headache right now," she said, leaning in closer. "The premium catering company just arrived to finalize the menu, and they are demanding the final $15,000 payment up front. But my bank just locked my credit cards this morning. They flagged a large purchase as potential fraud, and they said it will take at least 48 hours to unfreeze the accounts." The sheer audacity of her lie was staggering. I knew exactly why her accounts were frozen, and it had absolutely nothing to do with routine fraud protection. The stolen $300,000 from Martha's safety net had been completely drained to satisfy Derek's violent margin calls, leaving them with nothing but hollow plastic and desperate lies. Rachel looked at me with wide, pleading eyes, the absolute picture of a distressed daughter simply needing a minor favor from her loving father. "Could you possibly write a check for the caterers just to tide us over until Tuesday?" she asked, her voice dropping to a soft, vulnerable whisper. "We will pay you back the very second the bank finally clears the freeze, I promise." I looked at her, my heart entirely devoid of the paternal warmth she was attempting to manipulate. I knew that writing this check was effectively throwing more money into a burning furnace, but I also knew it was the absolute perfect cover. Refusing her now would spark suspicion and potentially disrupt the 72-hour window Leo Barnes needed to secure the concrete proof of their embezzlement. "Of course, Rachel," I replied, keeping my voice gentle and obliging. "I would never let your big day be ruined over a silly banking error. Let me go get my checkbook." I shuffled back to my bedroom, closing the heavy oak door behind me. I pulled my leather checkbook from the desk drawer, retrieving my silver pen. As I wrote out the sum of $15,000, my hand was completely steady. I signed my name with sharp, precise strokes. This was not a loan, and it was certainly not a gift. It was an investment in my own vengeance. I was purchasing their absolute, unquestioning complacency for the weekend. I stared at the ink drying on the paper, knowing with absolute certainty that this was the very last dime she would ever extract from me. This check was the final nail in the coffin of our relationship. I slowly tore the slip of paper from the binding, folded it neatly, and walked quietly back out into the chaotic kitchen, handing it over to the woman who was actively praying for my death. Rachel snatched the check from my fingers with a speed that betrayed her desperate greed. "Thank you so much, Dad," she squealed, pressing a hollow kiss to my weathered cheek. "You are the absolute best. I will get this sorted out first thing Tuesday morning." I nodded, feigning exhaustion, and retreated to the quiet sanctuary of the formal armchair in the adjacent room. I picked up a heavy hardcover novel, resting it on my lap, and closed my eyes to resume my invisible surveillance. Within minutes, the sweet, grateful daughter completely vanished. I heard the sharp, rhythmic tapping of her high heels as she paced across the marble floor, her voice echoing clearly through the open archway. She was on her cell phone, speaking rapidly to one of her shallow, high society friends. "The caterers are fully secured," she bragged, her tone dripping with arrogant satisfaction. "We are having the imported caviar and the Wagyu beef sliders. Yes, of course it is expensive, but Derek insists on only the absolute best for my milestone birthday. He is doing so incredibly well at the firm right now. The bonuses are just ridiculous. We are even looking at upgrading the summer house next season." Her words were a sickening tapestry of delusion. I sat perfectly still in the armchair, my eyes closed, listening to her weave these magnificent lies to impress people who did not genuinely care about her. She was bragging about imported caviar and hypothetical summer homes while simultaneously orchestrating the theft of my retirement equity just to keep her husband out of federal prison. The profound disconnect between the glamorous fiction she broadcasted to the world and the filthy criminal reality she managed in the shadows was breathtaking. She felt untouchable, completely insulated by the stolen wealth she believed was already hers. I listened to her bright artificial laughter ring through the decorated halls, feeling a cold, heavy sense of anticipation settle deep into my bones. She was absolutely blind to the storm gathering just off the horizon. She had no idea that a ruthless forensic investigator was actively tearing through her husband's hidden digital ledgers at this very moment. She believed she had successfully manipulated a broken, senile old man into funding her glorious ascension. She had absolutely no idea that she had just financed the very stage where her entire life was going to be systematically dismantled. The weekend dragged on with an agonizing slowness, each hour thick with the suffocating weight of my daughter's magnificent delusion. I spent my time seamlessly maintaining the facade of the frail, forgetful father, nodding along as caterers bustled through the kitchen and decorators draped the living room in extravagant fabrics. Rachel floated through the house in a state of absolute euphoria, completely convinced that she had successfully manipulated the board and secured her glamorous future. I watched her sip expensive champagne while testing the floral arrangements, her laughter ringing hollow against the granite countertops. The house was a hive of artificial joy, entirely oblivious to the catastrophic reality lurking just beneath the surface. It was early Sunday afternoon when the secure burner phone resting deep inside my pocket finally vibrated. I excused myself from the chaotic kitchen, shuffling slowly toward my bedroom with a practiced, unsteady gait. The moment the heavy oak door clicked shut, my posture straightened. I pulled the small plastic device from my pocket and answered. It was Leo Barnes. His voice was low, stripped of any professional pleasantries, and completely devoid of the faint amusement he had shown during our first meeting. He simply gave me an address for a different diner on the industrial edge of the city and told me to get there as quickly as I possibly could. I slipped out the back door, leaving the lavish birthday preparations behind me. The journey took me over an hour navigating public transit routes that carried me far away from the manicured lawns of my neighborhood. The new location was even bleaker than the first, a neglected concrete box sitting in the shadow of a towering highway overpass. The neon sign hanging above the front door was half-broken, buzzing with a persistent electrical hum. I pushed the heavy glass door open and stepped into a room filled with the smell of old grease and stale cigarette smoke. The diner was nearly completely empty at this hour, occupied only by a few exhausted transit workers nursing lukewarm cups of coffee. I spotted Leo immediately. He was sitting in a dark corner booth, his battered leather briefcase resting on the cracked vinyl seat beside him. A single untouched cup of black coffee sat on the table in front of him. When I slid into the booth across from him, I noticed a distinct change in his demeanor. The sharp, analytical detachment I had seen on Friday was completely gone. His face was drawn pale and deeply grim. He looked at me with an expression that bordered on genuine, unfiltered pity, and that single look chilled me to the absolute core. "I have dismantled the entire financial structure." Harrison Leo began, keeping his voice strictly confined to the dimensions of our booth. "I pulled every hidden ledger, bypassed the offshore firewalls, and traced every single dollar that moved through Apex Horizon Holdings. I told you that desperate men get sloppy, and Derek Foster was bleeding from every financial artery he possessed." I leaned forward, resting my forearms on the sticky table, bracing myself for the impact. "Tell me everything," I demanded, my voice cold and steady. Leo reached into his briefcase and pulled out a thick stack of printed documents, sliding them across the table. "First of all, there is absolutely no initial public offering happening at Derek's firm," he stated bluntly. "In fact, Derek Foster has not been employed by that hedge fund for over 8 months. He was quietly terminated late last year for severe professional misconduct and massive unauthorized trading. They kept it out of the press to protect their institutional reputation, but his career in legitimate corporate finance is completely dead. He has been putting on a tailored suit every single morning and leaving your house just to maintain a hollow, pathetic fiction." I stared at the documents, the stark black ink confirming the absolute destruction of their carefully curated reality. "But that is not the worst part," Leo continued, his voice dropping an octave lower. "Derek did not just lose his job. Before he was terminated, he attempted to cover his massive trading losses by borrowing heavily from unauthorized, unregulated sources. He went far outside the normal traditional banking system. He went to private, illicit lenders who do not operate with standard contracts or corporate lawyers. They operate with intense physical violence and relentless intimidation." I felt the air leave my lungs. How much, I asked, dreading the terrifying answer. Leo looked me dead in the eyes. $2 million, he said softly. "Derek Foster currently owes $2 million to highly dangerous people, and they have been aggressively calling in his debts for months. The limited liability company you found, Apex Horizon Holdings, was not a legitimate investment vehicle. It was a rapid transit shell created specifically to funnel untraceable cash directly to these loan sharks to keep them from breaking his legs." I looked down at my hands, thinking of the joint medical account. "The $300,000, I whispered, my voice barely audible over the hum of the diner refrigerator. "It is gone, Harrison." Leo confirmed, his tone entirely devoid of false comfort. "Every single cent of your late wife's life insurance money was wired directly through that shell company and immediately swallowed by Derek's illicit creditors. It was a desperate attempt to buy himself a few more weeks of breathing room. The money is absolutely unrecoverable. It is permanently and totally lost to the wind." The profound finality of his words landed like a heavy physical blow to my chest. Martha's legacy, the sacred safety net I had built to protect my daughter from the harshness of the world, had been completely incinerated to appease violent criminals, and Rachel knew about it. She had willingly handed over the account information. She had actively facilitated the theft of her own mother's memorial fund to cover her husband's catastrophic gambling. She was actively throwing away my hard-earned life savings to buy herself time. "And now they are coming for your house," Leo said, pointing to the final page of the dossier. "They need your equity to pay off the remaining balance. If they file that forged power of attorney and take out a secondary mortgage against your property, those loan sharks will take everything you own. You will be left completely homeless, and they will run with whatever cash remains." I sat back in the vinyl booth, staring at the evidence of their absolute moral bankruptcy. My daughter was planning a lavish birthday party for 100 elite guests tomorrow night. She was going to serve imported caviar and Wagyu beef, while dangerous men circled her home waiting to collect their brutal debts. She was dancing blindly on the deck of a rapidly sinking ship. I took the heavy file from his hands, feeling the cold, terrible weight of absolute truth. I was totally prepared for war. Tomorrow night, Rachel was going to host the most spectacularly lavish party of her entire life, surrounded by the wealthy elite society she so desperately craved. And I was going to hand-deliver a birthday present she would absolutely never forget. I had gathered my coat and was preparing to slide out of the cracked vinyl booth, ready to leave the suffocating grease of the diner behind, armed with the financial ruin Derek had meticulously hidden. But as I placed my hand on the table to push myself up, Leo Barnes did not move. He did not pack away his battered leather briefcase, and he did not break his intense, unnerving stare. "Sit back down, Harrison," he said, his voice dropping to a low, gravelly register that completely halted my momentum. "We are not finished." I froze, my eyes darting from his grim face to the briefcase still resting beside him. I had just absorbed the fact that my life savings were gone and my son-in-law was indebted to violent criminals. I slowly lowered myself back onto the cold seat, feeling a new icy dread settling over my chest. Leo reached into his briefcase for a second time. He pulled out a single thin manila folder distinct from the others, secured tightly with a red rubber band. He placed it squarely in the center of the scratched formica table, keeping his hand resting heavily on top of it. "The first file I gave you explains exactly why Derek is desperate." Leo began his analytical detachment, entirely replaced by a dark, heavy solemnity. "It explains the missing $300,000 and the looming margin calls. But this secondary file explains exactly how they intend to solve their $2 million problem permanently." He slowly slid the folder across the table until it touched my hands. "I want you to brace yourself, Harrison. What is inside this folder is far more sinister than simple financial embezzlement." I stared at the plain manila cover, my calloused fingers resting against the rough paper. The diner around us seemed to fade away, leaving only the deafening roar of my own heartbeat pounding in my ears. I unhooked the red rubber band and flipped the folder open. The top document was printed on heavy premium paper, bearing the ornate embossed logo of a major national life insurance conglomerate. I scanned the first few lines, my mind struggling to process the dense legal formatting. It was an executive life insurance policy fully underwritten and actively maintained. I looked at the primary insured party. My own name, Harrison Caldwell, was printed in bold black letters. The policy had been initiated exactly 12 months ago. My eyes traveled down the page to the coverage details and the breath violently escaped my lungs. The total death benefit payout was $5 million. It was an astronomical figure, a sum that went far beyond simply settling a standard debt. It was a massive, life-altering fortune. I quickly flipped to the second page, scanning the beneficiary designations. There was only one single name listed: Rachel Foster. She was the sole, uncontested beneficiary of the entire $5 million payout. If I died, the money would bypass probate, bypass any legal scrutiny, and drop directly into her bank account as a tax-free lump sum. I stared at the staggering number, feeling a wave of absolute nausea wash over me. They had actively placed a massive multi-million-dollar bounty directly on my head. How did they even secure a policy of this magnitude without my knowledge? I demanded, my voice trembling with a mixture of raw horror and rising fury. They would require my physical signature, my absolute consent, and a comprehensive medical examination. Leo reached across the table and tapped a secondary stack of papers attached to the back of the policy. He turned the pages to reveal a comprehensive medical file. I looked at the documents, my blood turning to ice. They were heavily detailed medical records from a private clinic I had never visited. They contained forged physician signatures and completely fabricated health assessments. "They falsified your entire medical history," Leo explained quietly. "They paid a private, unlicensed medical examiner to forge the health clearance forms, and they meticulously forged your signature on every single page of the consent documentation, bypassing standard underwriting protocols by paying exorbitant premium rates. The sheer terrifying magnitude of their plot suddenly crystallized in my mind with devastating clarity. The memory of the conversation I had overheard in the dead of night rushed back, playing on a relentless loop. I remembered standing in the dark hallway, listening to Rachel complain to Derek about the stress of my presence in the house. I remembered her exact chilling words. "If he just died, Derek, if he just closed his eyes and never woke up, all our problems would be solved. It would be the greatest birthday gift I could ever ask for." When I first heard those words, I believed they were the cruel, frustrated ramblings of an ungrateful daughter. But looking at a $5 million life insurance policy, I realized the absolute horrifying truth. That midnight conversation was not an emotional outburst. It was not a momentary lapse of empathy. It was a literal, calculated financial strategy. They were actively discussing a premeditated contingency plan. The forged power of attorney document was designed to drain the equity from my home to appease the violent men Derek owed money to. But if that failed, or if the loan sharks demanded immediate payment before the equity could be extracted, they had a secondary lethal safety net. My sudden tragic death was their ultimate payout. It would instantly erase Derek's massive criminal debt and leave them with millions of dollars in surplus cash to fund their lavish lifestyle. They had actively manufactured a scenario where my death was infinitely more valuable than my life. I sat in the vinyl booth staring at the fabricated medical records and the forged signatures, realizing that the fundamental nature of my reality had just violently shifted. An hour ago, I believed I was simply a victim of aggressive financial exploitation. I believed I was dealing with greedy, manipulative children who wanted to steal my retirement savings. I was prepared to fight a legal battle over property deeds and stolen cash. But this document fundamentally altered the battlefield. I was no longer just a wealthy mark to be scammed. I was a walking, breathing target. The stakes were no longer strictly financial. They were entirely lethal. If Derek's illicit creditors lost patience, or if Rachel decided her birthday required the ultimate payout, my life would end immediately. I closed the manila folder, my hands steady. The betrayal that should have broken my heart had instead forged it into solid steel. I looked up at Leo, who was watching me with silent, grim anticipation. "You have given me exactly what I need, Leo," I said, my voice eerily calm against the clatter. "They believe they hold all the cards. They believe I am just a frail old man waiting to die. But they have absolutely no idea what they have awakened." I slid the folder securely into my coat pocket. I stood up from the booth, leaving the background noise behind. The time for gathering evidence was completely over. It was time to prepare the absolute destruction of their lives. I walked out of the diner, the manila folder feeling like solid lead. My mind raced relentlessly, connecting the horrifying dots of my daughter's master plan. A forged power of attorney to drain my home equity, an empty emergency account, a $5 million life insurance policy paying out exclusively to her. As I walked toward my house, a paralyzing thought struck me. I stopped in my tracks under a dim street lamp. If my death was their ultimate financial salvation, why were they simply waiting for it to happen naturally? I had a mild heart condition perfectly managed with standard medication. I could easily live another 20 years. Derek was drowning in violent criminal debt. He barely had 20 days. I resumed my walk as a dark memory surfaced. 3 weeks ago, Rachel had completely reorganized my private bathroom. She threw away the familiar prescription bottles I had used for years and replaced them with a plastic daily pill organizer. She claimed I was getting entirely too forgetful. She insisted she would personally manage my medication to ensure I stayed healthy. Every Sunday evening, she meticulously sorted the small white pills into the compartments. I had actually thanked her for taking such wonderful care of me. The horrifying realization made me nauseous. I entered the house, slipping my shoes off to avoid making a sound. The house was quiet. Rachel and Derek were asleep in the master suite my money had purchased. I crept down the hallway and slipped into my bathroom, locking the door silently behind me. I turned on the vanity light. Sitting innocently on the edge of the marble sink was the pill organizer. I picked it up, my hands trembling violently, as I popped open the compartment labeled for Saturday. Inside rested a single small white pill. It looked incredibly similar to the vital blood pressure medication I had been taking for 5 years. It was the exact same size, chalky texture, and pale color. But as I held it directly under the bright vanity light, I noticed a terrifying difference. The manufacturer imprint stamped into the tablet was completely unfamiliar. A massive wave of profound clarity washed over my body. For the past 3 days, I had been leaning heavily into my fabricated senile routine to buy precious time. To sell the performance, I purposefully neglected to take my daily medication, hiding the pills in my pocket and flushing them away. I had expected to feel a slight increase in my blood pressure, a mild tightness in my chest. Instead, I felt incredibly sharp. My chronic physical fatigue had completely vanished. The heavy brain fog that plagued me was entirely gone. I was not deteriorating naturally from old age. I was slowly recovering from whatever deadly toxin she was forcing down my throat every morning. I needed absolute confirmation. I carefully extracted the remaining white pills from the Sunday and Monday compartments, wrapping them tightly in a piece of tissue paper. I placed the folded tissue securely in my pocket and quietly turned off the bathroom light. I did not sleep a single second that entire night. I lay wide awake in the dark, staring blindly at the ceiling, feeling the phantom weight of the $5 million bounty resting heavily on my chest. The next morning, I waited until Derek left. Rachel was completely absorbed in a tense phone call with her luxury party planner. I slipped out the front door, resuming my slow, shuffling gait until I was out of sight. I bypassed the local pharmacy. I could not risk anyone reporting my movements back to Rachel. Instead, I caught a transit cab and directed the driver to a small independent apothecary located 3 towns over. It was owned by an old acquaintance, a fiercely loyal pharmacist named Arthur. The brass bell chimed as I walked into the quiet shop. Arthur was standing behind the raised wooden counter. He looked up, his weathered face breaking into a warm, genuine smile. "Harrison Caldwell," he said happily. "It has been years. What brings you out here on a quiet Sunday morning?" I walked up to the counter, checking over my shoulder to ensure the shop was empty. "I need a massive favor, Arthur," I said, keeping my voice low and incredibly serious. "I need you to identify a specific medication for me, and I need this entire conversation to remain strictly off the official record." The welcoming smile faded instantly from his face, replaced by a look of deep professional concern. He nodded silently, sliding a plastic counting tray across the polished counter. I pulled the folded tissue paper from my pocket and gently unrolled it, tipping the 3 white pills onto the tray. Arthur pulled reading glasses from his shirt pocket and leaned in closely. He used long metal tweezers to turn one of the pills over, examining the numerical imprint stamped on the chalky surface. He frowned deeply, moving swiftly to his computer terminal and typing rapidly. "This is absolutely not a standard blood pressure medication, Harrison," he said, his brow furrowing in deep, troubled concentration. "This is a very specific, extremely high-dose prescription diuretic. It is typically used only in severe hospital settings to rapidly flush fluids from the body." I felt the blood drain completely from my face. What would happen if a person with a mild cardiac arrhythmia took this medication every single day? I asked, my voice barely more than a hollow whisper. Arthur stopped typing and looked at me, his eyes wide with absolute alarm. "Harrison, if you took this dangerous pill daily, it would trigger a catastrophic depletion of your potassium levels," he explained, his tone urgent and intensely grim. "Your body would violently flush out the essential electrolytes required to properly regulate your heartbeat. Within a few short weeks, the severe electrolyte imbalance would inevitably trigger a massive, entirely fatal cardiac arrest. Because you already have a documented medical history of heart arrhythmia, any medical examiner would classify it as a tragic natural heart failure. There would be absolutely no toxicology red flags raised. it would look completely natural. I stood frozen at the wooden pharmacy counter, the absolute truth settling over me like a suffocating shroud. Rachel was not just patiently waiting for me to die. She was not just plotting to steal my equity and my retirement money. My own daughter, the child I had raised, protected, and loved unconditionally for 35 years, was actively, methodically murdering me. Every single morning, she handed me a fresh glass of water and a white pill, smiling warmly as she watched me swallow a lethal dose of untraceable poison. She was slowly, deliberately stopping my heart to collect a $5 million payout. I thanked Arthur, my voice devoid of emotion, and walked out of the pharmacy. The Sunday sun was shining brightly in the clear blue sky, but my entire world had gone incredibly dark. Tomorrow night was her birthday party. She was going to celebrate her glamorous life while ending mine. I reached into my pocket and touched the cold plastic of the burner phone. It was finally time to utterly destroy them. The next morning, the house was a whirlwind of frantic preparations. The hired florists worked diligently in the grand foyer. I walked into the kitchen, playing the fragile patriarch perfectly. Rachel stood by the marble island, aggressively tapping her phone, her brow furrowed in deep frustration. When she noticed me, she smoothed her features into a mask of sweet concern. She poured filtered water and handed me the daily compartment, holding my morning medication. I smiled warmly, taking the high-dose diuretic from her manicured fingers. I raised the glass, palmed the lethal pill with practiced sleight of hand, and swallowed water. I thanked her, my voice dripping with manufactured affection, and slipped the poison into my pocket. She smiled back, convinced she was one step closer to her $5 million payday. "You look terribly stressed, sweetheart," I noted. She sighed dramatically. "It is my birthday outfit, Dad. The designer dress I ordered arrived completely ruined. I have absolutely nothing spectacular to wear for tomorrow night. I cannot host the most important party of the decade looking like an afterthought." I let out a soft, sympathetic chuckle. "We cannot have the birthday girl looking anything less than magnificent," I said gently. "Why do we not take a drive downtown? We can visit the luxury boutiques, and I will buy you the perfect dress for your celebration. Consider it an early birthday present." Her eyes widened, instantly alight with unadulterated greed. "Oh, Dad, you do not have to do that," she said, offering a transparent token of refusal. I insisted, waving my hand dismissively. Within 20 minutes, we were sitting in a private town car, heading toward the most exclusive shopping district. The ride was surreal. Rachel spent the journey chattering happily about her guest list and how wonderful Derek was doing at his imaginary job. I sat beside her, nodding and smiling, while every fiber of my being fought the primal urge to wrap my hands around her throat. I was sitting next to my own executioner, listening to her complain about napkins while she methodically planned to stop my heart. We arrived at a luxury designer boutique downtown. The interior smelled of rich mahogany and floral perfume. Sycophantic sales associates swarmed us immediately, fawning over Rachel as if she were royalty. I took a seat on a plush velvet sofa, resting my hands patiently on my cane. For 2 hours, Rachel transformed the boutique into her own personal runway. She paraded out in a succession of extravagant gowns, twirling in front of the gilded mirrors, seeking my constant approval. I played my role flawlessly. I offered gentle critiques, praised her beauty, and acted the part of the doting father who wanted nothing more than her ultimate happiness. It was the most difficult acting performance of my life. Finally, she stepped out, wearing a floor-length midnight blue silk gown, adorned with hand-sewn crystal embellishments. It carried an astronomical price tag of $4,000. She spun around the silk, catching the light. "This is the one, Dad," she breathed. "It is perfect." I smiled, a convincing expression of paternal pride. "You look absolutely breathtaking," I told her. "You deserve to wear the absolute very best. We will take it." She squealed with delight, rushing over to hug my shoulders before sprinting back into the fitting room to remove the garment. The moment the heavy wooden door of the fitting room clicked shut, my smile instantly evaporated. I checked to ensure the sales associates were distracted at the front register. I reached deep into my pocket and retrieved the secure burner phone. I unlocked the screen, opening the encrypted messaging application I had set up with Victor Bradley. My hands did not tremble. I typed out 3 simple, definitive words. Execute Protocol 0 now. I pressed send and watched the delivery confirmation appear. I immediately powered the device down and slipped it back into the darkness of my pocket. While Rachel was busy taking selfies in the mirror, completely mesmerized by her own reflection, a massive, invisible hammer was falling across the city. By sending that message, I had authorized Victor Bradley to unleash total devastation. At this exact moment, Victor was submitting emergency injunctions to the county clerk, placing an impenetrable legal lock on the deed to my home. Derek Foster would find it absolutely impossible to extract a penny of equity to satisfy his violent creditors. Simultaneously, Victor was executing the most dangerous maneuver of our strategy. He was formally contacting the Insurance Fraud Division of the Federal Bureau of Investigation. Victor Bradley was not simply canceling the fraudulent $5 million life insurance policy. He was canceling it under direct federal oversight, providing the agents with undeniable proof of forged medical documents and fraudulent signatures. He was actively laying a massive federal trap for my daughter and my son-in-law. He was also forwarding the preliminary toxicology findings from Arthur the pharmacist, along with my sworn affidavit regarding the lethal white pills directly to the major crimes unit of the local police department. He was actively securing the criminal warrants required for premeditated attempted murder. While Rachel adjusted her designer straps, a comprehensive task force of federal agents and local detectives was quietly assembling, preparing to completely dismantle her entire existence. They were ensuring she would never see the outside of a prison cell again. The fitting room door opened, and Rachel finally emerged, holding the protective garment bag over her arm. Her face was flushed with the thrill of spending my money. I rose slowly from the velvet sofa, leaning on my cane, and walked with her to the register. I pulled my premium credit card from my wallet and handed it to the associate. I did not flinch as the $4,000 charge was processed. I signed the electronic tablet with a steady hand, fully aware that I was purchasing the wardrobe she would wear when the authorities arrived to place her in handcuffs. The associate handed me the receipt, wishing us a wonderful celebration. We walked out of the boutique and stepped into the bright afternoon sunlight. The private town car was waiting by the curb. Rachel linked her arm tightly through mine, resting her head against my shoulder as we waited for the driver to open the door. "You are the absolute best father in the entire world," she said, her voice dripping with manufactured sweetness. "I do not know what Derek and I would ever do without you." I looked down at her, staring at the woman who was actively plotting to end my life, and I smiled. My expression was perfectly calm, masking the absolute inferno of rage burning behind my eyes. "You do not ever have to worry about that, sweetheart," I replied, my voice smooth and entirely composed. "We are going to have a celebration tomorrow night that you will remember for the absolute rest of your life." She laughed, completely oblivious to the double meaning of my words. We climbed into the back of the car, heading back to the house where the trap was fully set, primed, and waiting to snap perfectly shut. The morning of the party arrived with a frenetic surge of energy that completely engulfed the house. Commercial catering vans pulled into the circular driveway, unloading stainless steel warming trays, crystal glassware, and endless crates of imported delicacies. The event coordinator paced the foyer with a clipboard pressed tightly against her chest, directing the installation of a massive champagne tower, while floral designers arranged white lilies around the sweeping staircase. I sat in my usual armchair by the bay window, wrapped in my thick wool cardigan, sipping black coffee and playing the role of the frail, overwhelmed grandfather to absolute perfection. I watched the chaos unfold with a quiet, analytical detachment. Every clinking glass and every shouted order was paid for, with the final remnants of Derek Foster's fraudulent empire. It was a beautiful symphony of financial ruin playing out right in my own living room. Rachel floated down the sweeping staircase at exactly 9 o'clock, completely ignoring the frantic workers as she glided toward the pristine marble kitchen. She was dressed in plush cashmere loungewear, her face glowing with the sickening anticipation of a woman who believed she had finally secured her opulent future. Derek followed closely behind her, wearing a crisp designer polo shirt and an expression of strained, artificial confidence. He paused near the kitchen island, checking his expensive watch with a nervous twitch that I found profoundly satisfying to observe. He was simply a broken man, desperately holding his breath, silently praying his violent creditors would grant him just one more day of peace before he extracted my equity to save his very own skin. Rachel poured herself a tall glass of cucumber water and walked over to my armchair, beaming down at me with that perfectly practiced, incredibly lethal morning smile. "Good morning, Dad," she chimed, pressing a hollow kiss on my cheek. "Derek and I are leaving for the resort right now. We have a full day of luxury couples spa treatments booked to help me relax before the celebration tonight. The caterers have explicit instructions not to bother you. Just stay here, rest, and remember to take your morning medication." She reached into her pocket and placed the small plastic pill organizer directly onto the side table next to my coffee mug. She tapped her manicured fingernail against the compartment labeled for Monday, ensuring I knew exactly which lethal dose she expected me to swallow. I looked up at her, my expression soft and compliant. "Thank you for taking such wonderful care of me, sweetheart," I replied. "You two go and enjoy yourselves. You have certainly earned a day of relaxation." Derek offered a forced nod, ushering her out. The heavy mahogany door clicked shut behind them, sealing their fate. I waited precisely 5 minutes, listening to the powerful engine of Derek's luxury sports car fade away down the quiet suburban street. The moment the sound completely evaporated, the fragile, shuffling old man vanished. I stood up from the armchair, my posture straightening, my movements sharp and entirely deliberate. I ignored the event staff rushing past me with towering trays of food. I walked with absolute purpose down the long, carpeted hallway toward my private bedroom. I pulled a single, modest leather suitcase from the back of my closet and laid it flat across the mattress. I had zero intention of packing my tailored suits, my expensive watches, or any of the material luxuries that filled the expansive room. Those objects belonged to a life I was permanently discarding. I only packed the things that possessed genuine, irreplaceable value. I opened my heavy wooden desk drawer and retrieved the thick, leather-bound photo albums that documented 43 years of profound love and partnership with Martha. I packed the faded Polaroids of our modest honeymoon, the joyful snapshots of our early struggles, and the quiet, candid moments that captured the absolute essence of a beautiful life built on absolute honesty. I placed the albums gently into the bottom of the suitcase. Next, I packed a small fireproof folder containing my birth certificate, my passport, and the critical legal documents Victor Bradley had drawn up to secure my remaining assets. I did not take a single piece of clothing or any items that could anchor me to this poisoned house. I zipped the suitcase shut, the sound of the teeth locking together feeling incredibly final. I took a deep breath, preparing for the most symbolic act of my entire departure. I retrieved the small red velvet box I had kept hidden inside my pocket since yesterday. I carried the velvet box and my leather suitcase out of my bedroom, walking toward the master suite at the end of the hall. The caterers were confined to the ground floor, leaving the upper level of the house completely deserted. I pushed open the double doors of Rachel's sprawling bedroom. The space was a monument to her relentless vanity. Walk-in closets overflowed with designer labels, and an expansive mirrored vanity table dominated the far wall covered with expensive cosmetics and crystal perfume bottles. I walked directly to the vanity, moving slowly and deliberately. I did not smash the mirrors. I did not sweep her expensive bottles onto the floor or destroy the room in a fit of passionate rage. True vengeance never requires a chaotic tantrum. It is silent, precise, and devastating. I placed the red velvet box precisely in the center of her pristine glass vanity. It sat there, a vibrant splash of color amidst her shallow luxury. Inside the velvet box rested the 3 lethal white diuretic pills she had meticulously sorted for me, resting on top of a folded, detailed printed copy of the $5 million life insurance policy she had fraudulently secured. Next to the insurance policy was a business card belonging to the lead detective of the Major Crimes Unit. When she sat down at this mirror tonight to prepare for her grand entrance, she would open the box expecting to find a piece of expensive jewelry. Instead, she would find the absolute undeniable proof that I knew exactly what she was. She would realize that her perfect murder plot was not a secret, but a massive, inescapable trap about to snap shut on her completely. I stepped back from the vanity, taking one final look at the luxurious bedroom my hard-earned money had financed. I felt no lingering sorrow, no parental guilt, and absolutely no hesitation. The woman who slept in this room was a dangerous, calculating stranger who had forfeited her right to my love the moment she priced my life at $5 million. I turned on my heel and walked out of the master suite, closing the heavy doors behind me with a soft, definitive click. I carried my leather suitcase down the main staircase, navigating through the bustling caterers one last time. The head event planner offered a polite smile, assuming I was simply leaving to run an errand before the festivities began. I nodded courteously, my hand grasping the cold brass handle of the front door. I pulled it open and stepped out onto the wide, cold stone porch. The afternoon air was incredibly crisp against my face. As I walked down the long driveway, a profound sense of absolute liberation washed through my entire body. I was no longer a helpless victim. I was no longer a target waiting to be poisoned by my own flesh and blood. I was a free man walking away from a burning building, armed with the unshakable knowledge that true final justice was finally in motion. The trap was set, the evidence delivered, and the authorities were patiently waiting. I reached the sidewalk, setting my suitcase down to look back at the grand, imposing house. Tonight the music would play, the champagne would flow, and Rachel would smile happily. But before the final course was served, her world would be completely and permanently destroyed. I picked up my suitcase and walked into the bright, open future, leaving them entirely to their fate. I sat in the dark back seat of a rented sedan, parked discreetly at the end of the cul-de-sac, concealed beneath the heavy shadows of a sprawling oak tree. From my vantage point, I had a perfect view of the grand estate my money had built. The evening had fallen, wrapping the suburban street in a cool darkness, but my former house was ablaze with light and manic energy. The catering staff moved like a synchronized army through the glowing windows, carrying trays of champagne and expensive appetizers. Valets in crisp white shirts darted across the circular driveway, meticulously parking luxury vehicles. Porsches, Mercedes, and Range Rovers lined the manicured street, delivering the 100 high society guests Rachel had desperately sought to impress. It was a spectacular display of artificial wealth and curated social status, entirely funded by the phantom profits of a bankrupt man and the stolen savings of a grieving widower. I watched the silhouettes of Seattle's elite mingling in the formal living room, completely unaware they were standing in an active crime scene. I knew my daughter's habits flawlessly. I knew that at precisely 8:30, right before the caterers began serving the main course of imported Wagyu beef, Rachel would excuse herself from the adoring crowd. She would need a quiet moment to powder her nose, check her reflection, and bask in the intoxicating glow of her manufactured perfection. In my mind's eye, I followed her every step. I could perfectly picture her gliding up the grand staircase in that $4,000 midnight blue silk gown, the fabric trailing elegantly behind her. She would push open the heavy double doors of the master suite, leaving the loud music muffled in the background. She would walk gracefully toward her massive mirrored vanity, expecting to see the reflection of a triumphant wealthy socialite who had successfully manipulated her way to a fortune. Instead, her eyes would lock onto the object resting perfectly in the center of the glass table, the small, deep red velvet box. she would pause, a thrill of greedy anticipation rushing through her veins, assuming Derek had purchased a lavish diamond necklace to commemorate her milestone birthday. She would reach out and pluck the small white card resting gently on top of the velvet lid. The handwritten note was completely devoid of my usual feigned tremor. It was written in sharp, precise, unforgiving strokes. It simply read, "The best gift you could ask for." From Dad. I could imagine the exact moment her triumphant smile faltered, replaced by a sudden chilling spike of confusion. I was supposed to be the senile shuffling burden, easily contained and managed, not a man leaving cryptic velvet boxes on her private vanity. Her hands would tremble slightly as she lifted the hinged lid. There were no diamonds waiting in the soft silk lining. There was no expensive jewelry to show off to her vapid friends downstairs. Resting in the center of the box was the small plastic daily pill compartment labeled for Sunday, holding the 3 identical white tablets she had personally sorted for me. Neatly folded beneath the plastic container was a thick stack of highlighted legal documents. She would unfold the first page, her brow furrowing, as she stared at the official letterhead of Arthur's Independent Pharmacy. It was the Certified Laboratory Toxicology Report. The bold black text explicitly identified the white pills not as standard blood pressure medication, but as a massive lethal dose of prescription diuretics. The accompanying medical summary detailed how prolonged ingestion would cause a catastrophic electrolyte imbalance, triggering a fatal and seemingly natural cardiac arrest. The paper was undeniable proof of her methodical attempt to stop my heart. The true suffocating horror would hit her as she frantically shoved the toxicology report aside to reveal the second document. It was the original $5 million executive life insurance policy she and Derek had secretly taken out on my life. The very policy she believed was her ultimate financial salvation. But the pristine document had been violently defaced. Stamped across the primary beneficiary line in thick, heavy red ink were the words, "Canceled pending Federal Bureau of Investigation inquiry." Attached to the policy was a formal notice of criminal referral, drafted and signed by Victor Bradley, detailing the exact nature of the forged medical examinations and the falsified physician signatures. It was an absolute, ironclad legal death sentence. Rachel would stare at the red ink, the air violently escaping her lungs, as the walls of her glamorous world instantly collapsed inward. She would realize with paralyzing clarity that her late-night conversations, her carefully orchestrated medical deception, and her daily poisoning routine were completely exposed. Her father was not a frail target waiting to die. He was a contractor who had spent his entire life building impenetrable structures, and he had just expertly walled her inside a federal cage. The final document in the box would be the absolute breaking point. It was an expedited notice of foreclosure and immediate property asset seizure. Victor had triggered the legal lock on the house deed, officially blocking Derek from extracting a single dime of equity. Victor had also routed the financial details of Derek's $2 million illicit debt directly to the Federal Fraud Division. The document confirmed the house was being seized as part of a massive investigation into the money laundering and unregulated wire fraud. The home she was currently throwing a party in was no longer hers. The caviar she was serving was bought with embezzled funds that were now officially frozen. She would stand there in her $4,000 gown, staring at the absolute ashes of her life. The $300,000 she had stolen from her mother's emergency fund was gone. The $5 million payout she had tried to murder me for was destroyed. Her husband was drowning in violent criminal debt, and the federal authorities possessed a complete documented roadmap of their entire murderous conspiracy. She had nowhere to run and nothing left to steal. I sat alone in the dark sedan, my eyes fixed firmly on the front gates of the estate. The heavy bass of the party music thumped into the cool night air, but a new sound was rapidly approaching. It started as a faint wail echoing through the quiet suburban streets. Within seconds, the sound multiplied, growing louder, until it completely shattered the tranquility of the neighborhood. A fleet of black sport utility vehicles and marked police cruisers turned sharply onto the cul-de-sac, their flashing red and blue lights painting the lawns in harsh strobing colors. They jumped the curb blocking the driveway and boxing in the valet stand. Heavily armed local detectives and federal agents poured out of the vehicles, moving with swift, uncompromising tactical precision. The music inside the house abruptly cut off. The glamorous guests spilling out onto the front porch froze in absolute terrified shock. I watched calmly through the tinted glass as the agents breached the heavy mahogany front doors, flooding into the lavish foyer to execute the arrest warrants for fraud, embezzlement, and premeditated attempted murder. The party was over. The trap had closed. Justice had arrived. The heavy oak doors of the master suite burst open as Rachel glided into the room. She moved with the arrogant grace of a woman who believed she had conquered the world. The muffled sounds of the extravagant party below drifted through the floorboards, a symphony of clinking crystal and hollow laughter. She walked directly toward the massive mirrored vanity, her eyes firmly fixed on her own reflection, admiring the way the midnight blue silk gown clung to her frame. Then her gaze dropped. The small, deep red velvet box sat exactly where I had left it, perfectly centered on the pristine glass surface. A sudden, greedy thrill illuminated her features. She reached out with trembling fingers, fully expecting a lavish diamond necklace from her husband. Instead, she picked up the crisp white card resting on the velvet lid. The sharp, precise handwriting offered a terrifyingly familiar message. The best gift you could ask for. From Dad. A brief wave of profound confusion washed over her face. She slowly lifted the hinged lid. The reality of her absolute destruction hit her in rapid, suffocating waves. She stared at the plastic daily pill compartment, recognizing the 3 white tablets she had meticulously sorted with her own hands. Her breath hitched as she frantically unfolded the thick stack of highlighted legal documents hidden beneath the plastic container. The certified laboratory toxicology report glared up at her, identifying the lethal prescription diuretics she had been feeding me. Her hands began to shake violently as she shoved the lab results aside, exposing the $5 million executive life insurance policy. The massive red letters stamped across the beneficiary line screamed of federal intervention. Cancelled. Pending Federal Bureau of Investigation inquiry. The final document, the expedited notice of foreclosure and immediate property asset seizure, fluttered from her numb fingers and landed softly on the plush carpet. The staggering weight of her exposed crimes crushed the air from her lungs. She let out a piercing, guttural scream of absolute, unadulterated terror. Derek rushed into the master suite mere seconds later, his face flushed and his expensive designer tie slightly loosened. He stopped dead in his tracks, staring at his wife, who had collapsed onto the velvet vanity stool. She was hyperventilating, pointing a trembling, manicured finger at the scattered documents. Derek snatched the papers from the glass table. His eyes darted rapidly across the canceled insurance policy, the damning toxicology report, and the catastrophic foreclosure notice. The artificial confidence he had worn all evening instantly evaporated completely, replaced by the hollow, frantic dread of a trapped animal. He looked at the white pills, realizing with paralyzing clarity that their murderous conspiracy had been perfectly reverse-engineered by the man they believed was a senile fool. They had absolutely nowhere to run. The $2 million illicit debt was suddenly the least of their immediate problems. They were staring down the barrel of federal prison. Downstairs, the lively, pulsating rhythm of the lavish birthday party was abruptly shattered. The heavy, thumping bass of the music was completely silenced, leaving a sudden, terrifying void in the grand foyer. The animated chatter of the 100 high society guests faded into a stunned collective gasp. Harsh, strobing red and blue lights pierced through the towering front windows, casting long, frantic shadows across the imported floral arrangements and the crystal champagne tower. The imposing mahogany front doors were thrown open with a violent, uncompromising force. A massive, heavily armed tactical team of local detectives and federal agents flooded into the pristine hallway. The elite guests pressed themselves against the walls in absolute horror as the authorities moved with swift, calculated precision. Heavy boots pounded against the hardwood floors, bypassing the bewildered caterers and heading directly for the sweeping grand staircase. The tactical unit ascended the steps, their commands echoing loudly through the massive estate. The luxurious birthday celebration had instantly transformed into a highly public, profoundly humiliating raid. The federal agents breached the master suite, their weapons drawn, and their voices completely void of negotiation. They found Derek and Rachel frozen in the center of the lavish room, surrounded by the undeniable evidence of their horrific crimes. The cold, metallic click of steel handcuffs snapping around their wrists echoed with a beautiful, poetic finality. They were physically dragged out of their opulent sanctuary, led down the grand staircase, and paraded directly through the center of the silent, staring crowd of their elite peers. Rachel wept uncontrollably, the tears ruining her meticulous makeup and staining her $4,000 designer gown. Derek walked with his head bowed, thoroughly humiliated and entirely defeated. The socialites they had desperately tried to impress watched in absolute disgust as the couple was shoved into the back of waiting police cruisers. The massive, fraudulent empire they had built on a foundation of lethal deception had burned to the ground in a matter of minutes. I did not stay to watch the cruisers drive away. My part in their miserable narrative was officially concluded. I turned my back on the flashing lights, walking quietly down the suburban sidewalk with my single leather suitcase. A private car arranged by Victor Bradley was waiting for me just a few blocks away. I climbed into the quiet, dark interior, feeling an overwhelming wave of absolute peace wash over my tired bones. 3 weeks later, the crisp, biting air of Seattle was nothing more than a distant memory. I sat on a wide, sun-drenched wooden balcony, overlooking the vibrant turquoise waters of a small coastal town in Florida. The warm, salty breeze rolled off the ocean, carrying the sweet scent of blooming jasmine and the rhythmic, soothing sound of crashing waves. I leaned back into the comfortable cushions of a woven wicker rocking chair, holding a tall, sweating glass of sweet iced tea. The bright morning sun warmed my face, melting away the final lingering traces of the cold, stressful months I had endured in that gilded prison. I took a slow, deep sip of the cold tea, letting my eyes wander across the endless, unbroken horizon. According to the furious legal battles currently raging in the northern courts, the fragile, senile old man named Harrison Caldwell was practically a ghost, entirely unreachable and legally insulated from the catastrophic fallout of the foster family collapse. Victor had brilliantly executed the final phase of my departure. Rachel and Derek were sitting in separate federal holding facilities, facing decades of incarceration for premeditated attempted murder, wire fraud, and massive financial embezzlement. The grand suburban estate had been completely liquidated to satisfy the aggressive federal asset seizures. The loan sharks had been intercepted by the ongoing federal racketeering investigation. Their entire existence had been thoroughly erased. I closed my eyes, listening to the gentle cry of the seagulls circling above the shoreline. I had walked away from the deception, the poison, and the terrible greed with my mind sharp and my soul entirely intact. I had saved Martha's precious memory from being tarnished by their filthy crimes. I was no longer a victim, waiting in the dark. I was a free man, breathing in the fresh, salty air of a brand new life. I took another quiet breath, feeling more profoundly alive than I had been in years. I watched a small boat drift gently past the breakers, charting its own course over the vibrant blue tide. The warm morning sun continued to slowly rise, casting a brilliant golden light across the water, promising endless, beautiful, peaceful days ahead.